Hello, so today I'm with Kate Codrington, who I originally met when she came and studied on one of my massage and pregnancy courses. But now she's much more well known and her work has shifted from pregnancy much more to working with the menopause. And she's now a menopause mentor. And she runs groups and workshops. She's a writer, a podcaster, and an artist. And today our conversation is going to be focused a little bit on the menopause, but also on the process of creativity, the artistic creativity or any kind of creativity in our lives. And we don't really know where this is going to lead us. Like with any creative process, it starts a bit with an unknown, like in the second spring. Oh, I forgot to say, I think Kate has written a book on the menopause, a really lovely book full of lots of ideas, self-care for the menopause, called The Second Spring. And she has lots of creative activities in that. And the second spring, we're in the spring time of year now. We don't know what's going to happen with any process of creativity. We start from an unknown place. Moving into the menopause, we don't know how that's going to be for us. We're moving into a new unknown place. And that's a bit what our conversation is going to be today. We don't totally know where it's going to be, and hopefully it will be some kind of reflection and journey through the process of creativity, starting with the unknown.
Thank you.
So I will now hand over to Kate and we'll start our conversation. Thank you, Kate.
To really leave a big, of course, for comedy purposes, I would like to leave a big space here, big void.
Oh, a big void. So have a pause, because we don't know what's going to happen.
But that doesn't go down too well for YouTube likes. I think to have a big gappy space. I think that's. You know, I'm joking, but there's also a serious point there about how uncomfortable we feel with pauses, with emptiness and voids. And I'm no different. I still find winter difficult and find enormous relief. It is a miracle every time any kind of spring emerges. So I'm a bit of a sort of explorer, an adventurer into the unknown and into the places, the wintry places where creativity is not happening, where it looks like it's not happening, because exactly as you said, that's the beginning of everything. So to kind of recap, I've had the benefit of education from you, which was enormously helpful. And also the benefit of education from Red School, Alexandra and Sjanie Wurlitzer. And they've really developed this seasonal model, which they mostly use for menstruation, but also for menopause. And it's a little different to Chinese medicine theory, but they use the spring and simply put, the spring and summer of expanding into the world, to becoming more interested in the world, and autumn and winter of the priority becomes the inner world, ourself, increasingly. So there's this expansion and contraction that goes on. And of course, in our world, the summer is more prized, the bit that we can see. So summer might be, I'm going to kind of go all omni circles here. So summer would be showing your work at a private view, say, or launching your book, or launching your business or your website. It might also be ovulation, or it might be your sort of late 20s, 30s in your life when you're very kind of fiery and on it. Those are all summery times, and they're all times where our spirit is seen. Our spirit yearns to be recognized in the world in different ways. And as well as our spirit yearning to be recognized, we also have to, it's also asking us to recognize ourselves for our own self-acknowledgement. And in a, you know, in a menstrual cycle, classically, we feel that we've got this. I can do this female thing. I've got this. I can do that. I've got all my plates going on, and then we get to day 20, I don't know, day 19, day 20, day 21, and all the plates fall, and we feel as though we've lost it again. Everything, we're on the floor, it all went wrong. And this is because we haven't been able to acknowledge ourselves in summer. And then there's this natural shift towards our inner self, and the gap between what we've created and who we really are, you know, becomes really clear, and our discernment becomes really clear in our premenstruum. And this autumn would equate to perimenopause, to the premenstruum, and also to the place in creativity where we start to see the faults. So that might be an external critic. You might get, if you're writing, you might get some editing, or you might get some feedback from a friend. You might have lots of inner critics when you decide your work's rubbish and there's just no point, and you know, that might, it can be very severe, particularly when we're depleted. So when we're not nourished enough, when we're not rested enough, then these criticisms become very hard. And can be difficult to survive sometimes. Two very different experiences of being edited when I was writing my book. And early on, when I was really on my knees and very, very anxious about how it would go, and very concerned about, is it okay? Is it all right? Is the baby all right? And I found the process of being edited annihilating. You know, it seems an extreme thing to say, but I felt that part of me was being attacked. It was awful. And contrast that to other processes of editing, very similar process, where it felt enormously clarifying and supportive. And it was really because I was in a better resourced place. So just to chip in, why, you know, I've got layers and layers of cycles here. We have the seasonal cycle, but I'm talking about menopause, I'm talking about menstruation, and our central theme of creativity. Why am I doing this? It's because we can learn from the different seasons to inform us about where our creativity gets stuck. So for example, if you can notice what happens in your premenstruum or in your perimenopause, what triggers you, what snags you, the sort of themes and patterns that are emerging there. And that can inform you about your creative practice. So if, for example, like my example, you feel annihilated by your inner critic, say, then that can be really helpful in your creative practice to find some way of dialoguing with your inner critic, of letting it express itself more, of managing it. And there are many different ways of doing that. And that can support you. So where you practice self-care in one kind of in one sort of season, it will automatically have a knock-on effect in other ones.
Yeah, I mean, I totally agree with you, because actually you said that Alexandra Pope, and I always forget her poem.
Sjanie.
Sorry?
Sjanie.
Sjanie, together use the seasons quite differently, but actually there's lots that's really quite similar in Chinese medicine and the use of the seasons. And I totally agree with you that whatever stage of life you're at, or whatever's going on, using the seasons, everything is connected. So the menstrual cycle prepares us for the menopause, and if we shift things within the menstrual cycle, then that will impact on the menopause. Things we've learned in the menstrual cycle we can take into the menopause. New things may emerge, because it is like the cycle of changes with the seasons, isn't it? Each year is different. and we're different. So there's also that going on, that life is a constant change, and that's what the Chinese always talk about. But also for the Chinese, spring and summer are more with the yang energy rising, and that relates to all the things that you said about being seen, being validated, but it's also the inner and the outer world. So do we validate ourselves as well, or do we just rely on outer validation? And then the autumn and the winter are more the inward seasons. But I thought what was really interesting that you said about the autumn, and again, I totally agree with you, that we also vary, well, thinking of the outer world, some years we might, or some years with the earth, there's more rain or there's more sun. And especially in these more recent years, last year, it was very hot and dry, but the year before it was quite wet. And then you can have all sorts of things that affect the seasons that come in and make each year unique and each year different. But one big thing is about underlying all of it is how resourced we are. And if we're depleted, then each of the gifts of the seasons becomes more challenging, especially in the more inward times, the autumn. So I liked when you talked about the inner the criticisms. When you felt resourced, you were more able to take the criticism in a more constructive way. And when you had no resources, you felt annihilated. And the autumn, in terms of Chinese medicine, is the metal energy. And the metal is our basic core identity, and it links very much to the breath, our basic boundaries. And metal is about how we are who we are. If we don't breathe, we have no resources at all. We have to breathe. But it's also considered, metal is something quite sharp and cutting. And when we talk about metally type of people, they're often quite critical and cutting, and it's like the cutting gets into quite an annihilating feeling. So I thought it was very interesting, things you were describing about the critic and feeling annihilated very much relate to the Chinese view of metal.
Yeah, and that's I love these parallels and this cross fertilization, because that I think about it as the sword of truth. You know,
So
that's another kind of sharp metallic cutting
yeah.
that we have access to in our autumns, in perimenopause. A lot of the rage and the anger and the shouting, that it gets very negative. You know, it's, oh, these angry menopausal women. You know, that's the sword of truth that has that power to cut through the bullshit, to cut through the estrogenic people-pleasing niceness, to cut through to the truth. And yeah, it's absolutely when we're under-resourced that cutting gets messy.
Yeah, because we get muddled, don't we? We're tired. We need to have the clarity of the sword to see what needs to be cut and let go of as we go into winter, but also that it's not indiscriminate, that we don't just, I mean, I very much relate to your talking about writing and editing, that sometimes when people have criticized me in either writing or sometimes things in my teaching, if I'm tired and under-resourced, sometimes I go completely extreme. I have a moment of like, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't be doing this anymore, and the book's completely rubbish, or why am I doing this, or what have I got to teach the world? And I just know, for me now, that's a signal when I'm starting to think, oh, everything, I just have to stop everything. That's because I just need to stop. I need to go back and resource myself, so I have the energy to move out into the world again.
Yeah, and it's those little moments of gold, like, oh, that's the trigger, that particular thought pattern. Oh, those. Yes.
Yeah.
And then we can sort of pull back in and do whatever we need to do. And I very much believe that we don't need a new toolkit. We already have a very adequate toolkit. If you've lived for a couple of decades, you will already have an excellent toolkit full of knowing what sort of foods soothe you and what sort of foods resource you and what sort of movement is good for different times of your cycle, different times of your life, what sort of nervous system management tools you can use, and what makes you happy, and where you find, you know, it's really simple. Where you find your pleasure. Where do you find your pleasure right now? And following that trail of bliss, that trail of pleasure. And it's very tempting to get drawn off to the latest shiny online course, which is now always at our fingertips, or the latest method, or whatever it is. Whereas actually in our autumn, particularly in our autumns and winters, we need to come back to ourselves, and pleasure is the quickest way, quickest way in. I'm just talking about that now, focusing now, because I've just spent an hour talking to a client about pleasure, and she was like, "Oh, I don't know, I can't make the time," and or, you know, and all sorts of shame arising in the story, and I said, well, you know, pleasure will boost your immune system, will balance your hormones, will improve your bone health, will improve your concentration and clear brain fog, and, you know, all the stuff that we worry about.
But you're right. But I think that for a lot of people, feeling that it's okay to take the time to be happy, well, to be happy and to have pleasure. I think it's maybe changing with the younger generation. I don't know. But I know, speaking for me, for many years, I felt, why should I felt guilty about being happy, or felt guilty about taking time for me and pleasure. It's like, oh no, I was brought up to be a bit of a martyr in a way, or maybe I took that role on to be a martyr. Oh, I'm the one that can do this, and you know, I don't need to be happy. I just kind of carry on working. So there is also that thing about that it's okay to take pleasure, and that it's good for you to be happy and to take pleasure.
Yeah, wherever we can. And because it's harder somehow to do that in our autumns and winters than it is in our summer. So in our little go round the circle, we're coming into winter, which is, as I started, is the place of great interest, because it feels so challenging when we have nothing left to give, when we don't want to, when there's a big no, and we're staring at a blank page, and that we don't have the desire to feel the pencil on the paper, or whatever form of creative expression you are enjoying at the moment, when we have no desire for that. And of course, at that point, we feel that the game's up. That's it. I mean, a bit like your crisis in the face of criticism. It's one of those that there's nothing there, and it will never come back. And we fall into this place, and in Red School, they have phases, and they call it the void or separation. And it's such a terrifying and interesting place, because in the natural world, what happens in voids is they get filled up. You know, they naturally attract a depression in the ground will draw water or earth, or something will come to put a bowl in any house, and it will acquire buttons and paper clips and little things that you don't know what they are, widgets. What is this? So in our creative voids, they get filled with whatever is to hand. So that might be anxiety, that might be climate anxiety, that might be depression, that might be I don't know, getting busy for the sake of being busy. And it's our task in these separation or void places, in these wintry places, is to be with not knowing. And that's true of menopause, We're desperate to know who we are, we're desperate to make plans, we're desperate to be over there in second spring, zipping around, we're desperate for anything other than feeling this not knowing, having to explain to someone, saying, hey, how are you doing, what's your plans for the year? I don't have anything to give. I don't know. I don't know who I am anymore. And that place of not knowing is just so excruciating. And the same with creativity. But staying with the not knowing is staying in the place where everything comes from. And I know that you know a lot about conception. So I was really interested to hear from you about that void space of around conception and the space around conception.
Yeah, well, I mean, I suppose if you go into from the baby's point of view, from the incarnating soul point of view, I mean, in Chinese medicine and also in my own experience, because I have done some work on connecting with past lives, and in many traditions, they talk about that we forget everything that we've learned from previous lives, and we think we're a blank slate because we've forgotten everything, but actually we haven't. And we know, part of us knows exactly why we've chosen this particular ancestral line, this particular mother, father, whatever combination of people who are conceiving, even the way that we're being conceived. And there's many more ways of being conceived now. But on some level, we know it, but in this particular moment, in this particular body, in this particular incarnation, we don't. And that there is that veil of forgetting. What's that? I always forget. I can't immediately think of the quote of, I think it was Wordsworth, that we come in with this blaze of glory, but we've forgotten where we come from. So we do start within each new incarnation, at each new conception. It is like we're starting and we don't know where we are, and we've completely forgotten. Our whole memory, conscious memory, has been completely wiped. And a baby, this is what I think for the Chinese, I like the view of the Chinese that the baby is not particularly talked about as a blank slate, but that everything we experience for the first time, everything's new. So everything is unknown. And I do a lot of work with my clients, getting them to imagine what it is like for a baby. Yes, they know the womb, but even in the beginning, when they're in the womb, it's unknown. They're getting to know who their mother is or who's carrying them in the womb, and all the different sounds, and our senses come online very gradually. And touch is our first sense. So touch, that's why touch therapies are so powerful, because it connects with our earliest experiences and memories, which are before our brains developed, and has that conscious memory. But we see everything for the first time and with a newness. And they talk about, if we can retain that newness in the way you talk about a void, but that we experience everything really fully, we're completely present. And it's like, I always remember with my children, I loved it when they were really little, because they'd spend ages looking at a slug or a matchstick or a piece of grass, and it was great to just see things with fresh eyes. So if you talk about creative processes, it's seeing the same thing we've seen loads of times before, but really seeing it in this newness, and seeing it each time we see a star or the same star or the same tree, there's something slightly different about it, because things are constantly changing. And for the ancient Chinese, that was a really important thing, to keep that creativity and that playfulness and that unknownness of the child, that everything is, oh wow, I've not seen that before. And that if we can keep that alive in us, then we have that creativity. So yes, there is a void, and I've been working in the garden a lot, because all the weeds come up, and then I think, but if I pull up all these weeds, then there's blank earth. It's just going to come up with weeds again. So I have to decide what I'm going to put in this blank space and choose what I want to be there. Maybe I do want grass to be there, but maybe I want a lavender or some thyme or some rosemary or whatever it is. Like with the image you had of the cup, you can have a cup that's empty and people put like rubbish in, like you were talking about anxiety or like buttons or things or widgets or whatever, things we don't know what to do with often. Oh, there's a button, I don't know, we don't decide to throw it away, and so we can end up putting lots of junk back in our lives. So for me, it's also about being really respectful of this void and then consciously taking time to connect with, what do I want to put in? It's an opportunity, isn't it, to start anew, to put new things in this space. And we don't have to be doing the same things, even when we are in the autumns and winters of our lives. And that's what also I like about the ancient Chinese view, because they say, yes, even towards the moment of your dying, you can experience everything with a fresh view. And actually, I was with my mum. No, I wasn't with my mum when she died. And that was kind of precisely the point I wanted to make, because my mum was quite dependent on other people for most of her life. And it felt that when she died, I really felt she'd chosen for nobody else to be there, that it was something that she wanted to do on her own. And so she died in the middle of the night when everybody was asleep. And in the morning, we found that she was dead, which was quite a surprise. And it just made me realise, even in the moment of our dying, the ultimate winter and going to the ultimate void when we leave our body, we can choose to do something differently than we've done during the rest of our life. And I find that quite encouraging. You can always choose to make a different choice.
Oh my goodness, there's so many threads there that I'd like to pick up.
Okay.
So backtracking a bit to birth. So there's something about the way that we create that also will have echoes in our birth story. And in particular, so when you're looking at an empty page, there's something about holding that not knowing with softness. If you think about the womb environment, or the environment that you really desire for a baby in the womb, you know, it's that sort of strong contained holding. So what does that look like in creative life? It looks like giving yourself nice music when you're working, making sure that you have nice snacks and food and a cup of tea and a nice time boundary, and a realistic time boundary that works for you, or flowing with your energy if you don't like time boundaries. It's about finding your own gentle quality of strong holding, and our own nourishment, whatever that might mean. So creatively, that in sort of void spaces in winters, it's about filling yourself up creatively. So that might be looking at going to galleries, or reading books, or picking up snails. Going, whoa! Actually, I have a lovely picture of a snail that has a yellow stripe. I found it the other day on the doorstep, and it's just an ordinary little snail with a bright yellow stripe. How did that happen? Anyway, you know, or looking at nature, or being that toddler in that place will feed you, so that when the creative, I was going to say not when the creative juices flow, because that suggests that they stopped, but when the creativity is visible again in the world. So we're coming into spring, and that's more about, for me, I associate that more with the spring, with the seeing a new springness. We can welcome the baby, you know, and I think that by thinking about these seasons and our birth stories and our menopause as our cycle, it's like loads of pancakes stacked up in front of us. We are, by welcoming our creativity as it starts to be present and visible again, we're also healing our birth story. We're also welcoming that. Mm-hmm. And these springs require enormous tenderness. You know, the child who's examining the snail and is told to hurry up because we have to go to school, or I have to go to work, or whatever, is rushed along and told to throw away the thing, you know, loses an enormous amount.
Or worse, if they pick up the snail and they're told, oh, that's disgusting, you don't want to touch that, you might get infections or whatever, you know. Not just letting them explore it. I mean, clearly if it's something really dangerous, like a jagged piece of glass, but to get them to be aware, rather than, oh, put that down, but connect with why you want to put that jagged piece of glass down, and why you might not want to stick your finger inside the snail and then put your finger in your mouth, but giving a bit of space to explore that there are things we maybe don't want to pick up and put in our mouth, and other things that we do.
Yeah, because at the beginning of spring, when ideas are new and fresh, and we start to be full of possibility again, as we kind of are now. It's April here in Europe, and it's bonkers. I don't know how it is with you. It's bonkers out there. Everything's going.
Yeah.
You know, it's easy to rush into wanting the sprout, the new thing to be finished already. And to box it in, or to judge it as being, you know, to judge the new project, the new idea as being stupid or wrong, or telling somebody who says you're being silly and dreaming and idealistic and it's totally impractical. So our springs, just like the child with the snail, require a great tenderness and spaciousness around them to allow things to grow, because some things might grow in that cycle and some things might not. And you know, you were talking about weather early. There might be a late frost or a storm that comes in and flattens all our plans, and then it might grow again the following year in a different shape. So I think that spring requires an enormous tenderness. I was wondering, could you talk about post-menopause and tenderness, the tenderness required there?
Post-menopause and the tenderness. Well, I find that a lot of people, including myself, post-menopause become even more creative, because the tenderness, or maybe it's because we've become more tender with ourselves, and we see that we recognize the patterns more of, like the example I gave earlier, oh, this is all completely rubbish, I just need to kind of burn it or throw it all away. I think, okay, look, I'm just having that moment today, that means I need to stop, do something, like you say, that gives me pleasure. So maybe you're right, maybe as we get in after the menopause, if we have, though I think it depends on how we've lived our lives before and how much we have developed resources. I was going to pick you up on that before, because you were saying we don't need all these new shiny tools, but maybe some people do, because they have avoided things and they haven't taken the time for themselves. It depends how much we have developed things that work for us, how much we know ourselves, how much we know what supports us, what depletes us, and all of those different things. And I suppose a lot of the people that I've been working with post-menopause have been taking the time to work those things out, and it's reminding them that these things have worked in the past, and they've got more of a context in which to cite them, to think, oh yeah, there was that year where I couldn't do anything, or even a few years where I couldn't do very much, but then the spring came into life again and I had more outer creativity. But it also makes me think about how we see creativity, because you were talking about seeds in the spring, and I've been planting lots of seeds, and some just don't come up. But then some I think I look at them and, oh, there's nothing, or maybe I need to throw that seed tray away, but then a day or two later, all of a sudden it comes through. So it's like, like you say, being spacious, giving time. And yes, maybe there are some things that don't come through, but maybe we just need to give them a bit more time. So maybe that's the tenderness. I don't know if that's what you were wanting me to say about the tenderness, about accepting ourselves in all the different aspects of ourselves. I suppose, going back to your thing about, well, we talked about depletion and the void and being tired. I think I'm finally beginning to realize that when I'm tired, I just need to stop. But in the past, I would more push through that, and I could push through that. And now I think part of it's like, well, why am I pushing myself through it? Because I know I'll get more tired afterwards. So there is that tenderness. And then I suppose seeing, well, what can I not do, rather than trying to do everything, and maybe valuing a bit more the inner world, and I don't need to do all these things to please other people anymore. I can just really listen to what feels right for me now. And if someone else doesn't like that, then I'm not going to force myself to do something that I know will be depleting just because I feel that I should. I don't know.
Those things sound like a deep tenderness to me.
That's tenderness. Yeah.
Self-compassion. Accepting
limitations.
Yeah.
I suppose, yes, partly it is that I don't have the same physical energy in the same kind of way as when I was in my 20s. But then when I was in my 20s, I would waste a lot more energy by getting caught up in things and then getting tired. So now it's about more the discrimination and choosing how I want to use my energy. And then I do have energy for the things that I want to do. And listening to the inner cycles. And knowing that the void and the unknown is part of the process. If you're coming back to that beginning, the unknown, I still find it difficult. I think I'm happy when I'm out, when I'm writing or when I'm teaching or when I'm gardening and I'm feeling kind of active. And sometimes just sitting and feeling tired, I've always found it quite uncomfortable.
And just to say that in winters, for many people, similar to what you're saying, that sitting and doing nothing doesn't work for them. That there are many different ways to rest. And that resting might be going for a walk, or it might be drawing, or it might be drawing a mandala, or it might be moving, or or gardening, or any number of things. For me, I would describe the quality of rest as being something that creates softness in my mind. So a sort of a bit more spaciousness in my thoughts, definitely softness in my shoulders, heart, and probably a better sense of grounding as well. So that might be any number of things. It's not necessarily lying down, although I do like to spend a lot of time in bed reading books. But then you are reading books. You're right. I think maybe sometimes people think rest is just lying down and going to sleep, whereas it isn't necessarily. Like you say, I also, for me, it can be just pausing and being aware of my breathing and relaxing my shoulders and becoming more aware of my environment, I think, as well. And especially like now we're talking on Zoom, sometimes I find it quite helpful if I am a lot at the computer or talking on Zoom, is to just close my eyes and just be aware of my breath. I think that's why I sometimes like teaching exercise or movement, because already that is a more inward, if we're talking about inner and outer, as you talked at the beginning,
going more into my internal self, and I just being aware of that, switching from the outer world to my inner world, seeing the more gestational aspects, like you said, about being in the womb, how I can contain myself, how I can be more within the dark, and just being a bit more still, but it doesn't mean being asleep. Although sometimes it does. Sometimes just I find if I just lie down and close my eyes, but actually I rarely sleep in the day, but sometimes I just need to go somewhere quiet, lie down, close my eyes, focus on my breathing, and just rest for a little while.
Yeah, I'm a big fan of Yoga Nidra because it gives such a strong focus through the body mapping. But even that, for some people, it can exacerbate anxiety. So moving meditation, bringing the sort of quiet awareness that you're talking about into walking through space. In nature.
It's like I find walking meditation is very powerful, just taking off shoes and socks and standing in the grass and just walking really slowly and feeling the earth. Very, very powerful. But like you say, it really depends on different people. It's about encouraging people to find what works for them, and it can be different at different phases of our lives. It can be different in different outer seasons of the year as well. And maybe that is partly the unknown, is that things are always changing. Each spring is slightly different. Yes, there are lots of things that are similar about spring, but some springs are warmer. Some springs, like you say, you get a frost and all the blossom dies, and then you don't get the fruit that year. But then another year you do. Or another year it's too hot and plants die because they're too hot. And it's just, we can never take anything for granted, I suppose, is what I'm saying.
Yeah. And to that moment to moment presence with what is, that sort of checking in, is where that becomes absolute gold. Because then, because all these different cycles are layering up. So it's spring now in Europe, but somebody listening to this might be bereaved and ill and tired and lying in bed and really not connecting with that. So, and that it can feel, it brings a very poignant pull, because you will be feeling the pull of spring to be out there and to engage at the same time as not wanting to. So another of the key kind of skills that we learn as we age is to hold the tension between these sorts of conflicts. That was a sort of annual and physical thing, but coming back to creativity, when we're in summer and full of juice and really in the flow, in the zone where you just, it's very rare, doesn't last very long, but we think of it as proper creativity when you're in the flow, and then the pen moves and the paint and the everything happens and it all comes together. And you might not have the time to do it. because other things are happening, or that's and we have to learn to hold that tension of holding that energy in the constriction of our everyday lives. And that's the real juice, the real meat of living with a seasonal awareness, I think. Because it's always going to be compromised. There's always going to be a compromise in that, because we live in the real world.
Yes, because there are the outer seasons, and as you've already said, the inner seasons as well, which could be in a completely different phase, and then it can create a lot more tension. Like if you're ill in the summer, and everybody else is outside, and you see all these
Woohoo, you hear, smell barbecues coming through your
yeah.
through your window and children playing, and you're
And you're in the winter of just not wanting to be with anybody. Yeah.
yeah.
So you're right, it's holding that the tension when the inner and the outer world are at completely different phases, opposing phases. Yeah.
I mean, just to kind of close with this sort of theme of contrasts and holding tension, my menopause turned out to be an enormously creative place. I had an art school education, and that really kind of that really shut me down. And I wasn't really able to follow my creative flow much. And I mean, having a family, that makes everything more complicated, having children. Until I really, that feeling of mortality, of becoming aware that that my mortality was closer, and my life was definitely finite. And it's a real gift of menopause, that okay, so what are you going to do with it? Time is short. Stop messing around, Kate. What are you going to do with yourself? And it became very clear that if I carried on in the way that I was, working really hard, lots of bodywork clients, that my hands I wouldn't be able to create the art that I wanted to make. So I decided to stop and give that space, and to just see where it took me, and make my creative life a priority. And it was, yeah, and it was central to it was not letting go of goals. So it's very much that sort of spring feeling that we were talking about allowing things to grow, and not wanting them to be grown already, not wanting them to be, you plant the seed, and in our mind's eye we imagine the beautiful lavender bush in bloom, but of course that's 7 years down the road.
Yeah.
To not be in hurry, not push myself and rush towards the 7-year goal of having the beautiful lavender bush, but just to feel the scratch of pen on paper and enjoy that for what it was. And it really allowed so much more to flow. It was remarkable.
Yeah, I remember, because I think you came on a residential that I was running at the time, when because you had a menopause break, didn't you? I can't remember what you called it.
Yeah, I took 6 months off.
Yeah. And I think that takes a lot of courage. I don't think that, and that's not encouraged. I mean, maybe that is something that could be more encouraged, like when people have a baby. Ideally, although that time has been cut down a lot, but more people talk about having a baby moon, and maybe having a whole month they just at home with their baby and bonding. And as we go through our lives, we probably need longer time. So I wonder how much of what goes on that creates tension in the whole perimenopause phase is people not being able to just take time out of where they're at and go step into the void, in a way, step into the unknown, and just reevaluate everything, which is what you did. You decided to stop working physically with massage and use your skills of working with clients in another way, but also to open up a whole new other creative aspect in your life of going back to
I made a deal. I had to sit with not knowing, and I made, one of the rules was I didn't think about what I was going to do until right at the end, because of course my mind was busy trying to figure it out. But to really sit with not knowing, and taking that time out I was hugely lucky, and it was I'm aware that it was something that's complete privilege, from a life of complete privilege, to be able to do that. But even if we just allowed, even if it was in the culture, just knowing to allow people to let go a bit, to let go of responsibilities a bit, that would be hugely helpful, because the current narrative is that you take HRT and you get on with it. You know, I'm not myself, I can't get on with things. That's what most people say. You hear it all the time in the press. And we shouldn't be getting on with things. We should be stopping letting go of things.
Well, that's what I was going to say, because it made me laugh when earlier on when we were talking, you said, and if someone says to you, "Oh, what are your plans?" and you say, "Oh, I don't know," that instead of like saying to someone, "Oh, what? Why don't you know?" It's to say, "That's great that you don't know. That's a really creative place to be. You've got everything's open to you. Great." And but someone says, "Oh, I don't know if I've got the energy to do that anymore." We say, "Great, that gives you a different perspective on it."
Right, that's the takeaway from this conversation. Everybody who listened to this encouraged their friends when they said, "Oh, I don't know what to do," or "I'm so stuck." If everybody on every occasion said, "That's so great." Imagine the change that could happen.
And if they say, "I don't know if I want to go into work today," say, "That's great." It's showing you something that yes, to value that we don't know, but not having a plan. Like you say, it's interesting. You said that was a rule of your time out, but a rule in a sense of being an open rule, that you're giving a rule to keep the space, to keep the boundaries.
It was a boundary. It was a healthy boundary. To keep to a healthy, fierce, and tender boundary, to hold that space for me, to allow whatever wanted to emerge.
So that's a bit like the womb space. I liked when you talked about the womb and creating our own womb that contains and supports a strong contained holding, you said. I thought that was really nice to think, what regardless of how our life was in the womb, because for some of us it can be quite a challenging time, but now to imagine how we want our ideal womb space to be. And it is a place of potential, isn't it? Of just being held. We've got a clear boundary and we're floating around and we're just being in the moment. And a baby in the womb doesn't have plans of, their body might have plans of how it's developing, but we're just in a space of potential.
And that thing that you did to show the strong, clear boundaries is an excellent place to start, because that's always available to us wherever we are. You know, to feel, we can feel edges there. We can feel like we can contain ourselves. That's a great, that kind of there's probably a clever name for it. I'm sure that somebody's given it a trademark and turned it into a practice, but that sort of firm containing touch is very helpful, I find.
Womb kind of touch.
Let's trademark it.
Yes. Well, do you want to finish with a practice that you find is helpful? Do you want to come back to the unknown, valuing the unknown? I mean, I don't know if that's the most important thing that you want people to take away from this discussion on creativity. The emptiness, the void, the blank space, and how to support people to welcome that.
Well, I think our practice of celebrating it in other people is step one. I think that's absolute genius. Well done! Hooray!
You don't know what you're doing in life. Great! Yes. New opportunities.
I think that's very light-hearted, but the more that we can say that, even as a funny thing, it still affirms the possibility. But I think that in those spaces of not knowing, what it requires is softness, really, and that starts right from the breath. So I would say exhaling first, and then just allowing the breath to come and go in its own way, and really trusting that the breath has its own intelligence. So probably people listening to this will have done some sort of breath work and have all sorts of ideas about correct breath and things being right. I know I do. I'm tortured by thoughts of how I ought to be breathing. But so it's quite a radical thing to just allow yourself to breathe and to invite softness into that.
Yeah, you're right. Just to follow your own flow of breath without an expectation of it being a particular breath practice, but just listening to your breath. Like we might encourage people to listen to their body or listen to their desires, as you said. Just
when I see this, I'm not even sure, but I'm pretty sure I saw some study where there was a control group. I think it was for hot flushes. There was a control group of women who just watched their breath, and the research group of women who did an actual breath practice. But I think it was coherent breathing, 6 in, 6 out. And the results were similar. So you don't necessarily have to do anything special. Just often, just the observation is more than enough. And I think that's all I'm going to offer in terms of practices, because being kind to yourself and noticing your breath is just more than enough. Oh, you've disappeared. Where have you gone?
Oh, I disappeared. I think the battery maybe ran out on my camera this time. Kate, I've had these various moments of unknownness. So I will talk for a moment and I'll let Kate speak to you for a minute while I just get my picture back. And hopefully I won't.
Thank you so much. I love this so much. We're held in a process of not knowing.
Yeah, we don't.
So maybe it's good in with the darkness.
Yeah, I've gone into the void, so I'll be in the unknown, and you can all think about what happened. You said you wanted to do this at the beginning, didn't you? You wanted for the YouTube to just go into the unknown of having a blank screen.
Yeah,
that's what the
void place. Yeah,
inspired to do.
Yeah, sorry, I invited that one straight in.
So it's probably good that there's a blank screen. Oh no, now you're seeing lots of. I should be careful. Yes, you could. This is the whole creative process that you see going on here of what's moving into the blank screen. So we'd have a blank screen, and then I will reappear. Maybe I'll be different in a different guise. It's probably good to have that, the unknown. We didn't plan for that. So and things happen, don't they? I think again in our culture it's a lot. People think, oh, I need to be able to plan and control, and does everything go to plan? And if it doesn't go to plan, people think that's not a good thing. But life doesn't. Often when we go in a different direction, it can be even more rewarding, can't it, than where we thought we were heading. We end up heading somewhere else.
Yeah, I find in general my ideas about what I think ought to happen are pretty puny. What actually happens.
Yeah.
You know, I'm reasonably smart and reasonably creative, but the way that the flow takes me is usually a lot more interesting.
Mm-hmm. And that's a really good description of creativity. We come back to that our conversation was about a journey into the unknown and being creative, that the journey accepting the unknown actually probably takes us into more creative places, because we're going outside our perceptions. We're being like the child and just exploring everything. Do you want to say anything else to end, or does that feel complete?
It feels like we've completed a cycle here.
It does, yeah.
There's a sense of, how do I know that? I feel a sort of groundedness in my lower belly and a sense of satiation, actually, sort of completeness. Yeah, so maybe we can invite people listening to also just take a moment to feel if they feel complete, and how does that feel
in their body. It may be like Kate described for her, they feel grounded, you feel grounded, or you feel satiated. Or maybe you don't yet feel complete, but Kate and I aren't able to create that sense of completeness. Maybe there's something else you need. Maybe you need to go off and have a walk, or what do you need? What do you need in this moment to feel complete? And I suppose the two other things for you to ponder are, how do you feel when you're in the void? And how do you feel, what creative processes do you want to engage with? Or maybe we could take a moment just to be still and in a void and connecting with your inner self, your inner world. Noticing what you need now. And also, what gives you pleasure? What do you desire? Maybe not even what do you need, but what do you desire? That's for me the spark of creativity, or a spark of creativity. Desire and pleasure. And so coming out of your inner world, back into this outer world with me and Kate, and I'll just invite Kate if she wants to say any final words before we end.
Really, that whatever season that you're in is okay.
Mm.
And to really encourage you to be with the season that you're in, whether you're feeling more bright and sparkly and uppy and outy, or inward, discerning, or quieter within. To do what you can to be with that, even in small ways in your life, and that's more than.
Yes, because each season has its gifts. And we
a whole other
yes, that's a whole, yeah.
We're starting a new cycle.
We start a new cycle, yes. Yeah. Well, thank you so much, Kate, for sharing this time with us. And I'll put down below different resources, ways that you can get in touch with Kate. She has her own podcast, which she interviewed me on, and I'll put down all her contact details, her website, her Instagram, and continue the conversation of creativity. Thank you.
Thank you, Suzanne.